The Audio Beacon, January 2021. Faith, hope, and love. And so, that was 2020. In fact, of course, as I write this, it is still 2020, and we are waiting to hear what may, or may not be, permissible during the Christmas easing, and then to decide to what extent we may or may not wish to take advantage of the relaxation of the rules. But by the time you are reading this, that will all be past history, the almost final page in the extraordinary annals of our very own 21st century year of the plague. There is so much to say about 2020 that my mind and my typing fingers have no idea where to start. And yet, for so many of us, for so much of the year, nothing much happened. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't meet anyone. The skies were quiet. The birds sang, the butterflies fluttered, and the roads were almost empty, except for unaccustomed family outings by bicycle, clearly enjoyed more by some members of the various parties than by others. The sun shone day after day. It really did, you know, although it seems hard to remember now. Shopping for necessities became an expedition, fraught with peril and queues outside shops and confusing arrows and one-way systems inside and hand sanitizer and trolley wipes and empty shelves. Word whizzed round the village if there was pasta in stock, or, even more excitingly, flour, or, whisper the words, toilet rolls. We stopped in the street and along the footpaths and chatted, at a safe distance, to neighbours whom we might previously have seen in glimpses, dashing off to work at dawn, returning at dusk, but who now had time and to spare to talk. Volunteers appeared out of nowhere to do what they could to help friends, neighbours and strangers. Solitude became loneliness for many. And people were furloughed, and people's jobs disappeared, and people died, and people recovered. And schools were closed, and children enjoyed the freedom, and children were bored and drove their parents to distraction. And we all tuned in to the daily briefings, and we all learned to read graphs, better, sometimes it seemed, than those presenting them. And churches were closed, and meetings were cancelled, and, to our amazement, we all, well, nearly all, learned to Zoom, and then to bubble. The possibility of a vaccine, maybe, just maybe, by the summer of 2021, was like the elusive pot of gold at the rainbow's end. And where are we now? And what have we learned? What have we forgotten that once we knew? If you're anything like me, you are still processing 2020 and its twists and turns and peaks and troughs, different experiences and different responses for each of us. What will life be like post-COVID? Who knows? What will happen to those new friendships and those new puppies and bicycles if it comes to that? What about those old relationships with people we haven't seen for nearly a year? What will be the same? What will be different? What have we lost? What have we gained? 2,000 or so years ago, St. Paul wrote, "And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love." We need them all now, just as much as he needed them then. So, may they be ours to take with us into the year ahead, into 2021, whatever that may bring. Jenny. January commemorations. 30th of January marked the execution of King Charles I. In 1649, after the Second Battle of Newbury, the king wrote to the mayor and said that he commanded that the villages be scoured for injured soldiers, and even though they be rebels, they were to be carried to Newbury and treated for their wounds. Not exactly the actions of Cromwell's man of blood description. 13th of January, Mary Slessor, born in Aberdeen in 1848. Aged 28, she trained to be a missionary and went to Nigeria. The country was in a state of chaos. Infanticide and human sacrifice still took place. Women's rights were non-existent and disease rife. Mary caught malaria. She lived amongst those she worked with, and her steady determination won her respect. She also learned the local language. Mary adopted children rejected by their parents. Twins were considered cursed. By the 1900s, she was helping vaccinate Nigerians against smallpox. However, she suffered increasing bouts of malaria and had to travel in a handcart pushed by an assistant. She died in 1915 and was given a state funeral. She is remembered as the mother of all peoples. Quote, "When you think of the woman's power, you forget the power of the woman's God." In the past. In January 1907, West Woody had a new rector appointed. He would perhaps be classed as a broad churchman, having shown himself interested in all questions of modern scholarship. On 31st of January 1901, a service of extreme solemn character was held in Inkpen. The chancel screen and pulpit were draped in black. The rector preached on the universal need for redemption and asked for prayers for the late Queen. But in Kintbury, in January 1790, committed to the county Bridewell, Thomas Hillin charged on the oath of James Thatcher, surgeon of Hungerford, with attempting to extort money by threatening to charge him with a detestable crime. And no, I have not found out the nature of the detestable crime. Sorry. This is not in January, but I could not resist it. In 1892, the Newbury Weekly News included this snippet. Inkpen and neighbourhood is a place of all kinds of sweetness, from flowers and fruits to honeymoons. Christmas in the Benefice. A cold coming we had in Kintbury, but we managed to celebrate Christmas morning. Over 50 families with children and dogs gathered in social distancing groups. Younger members of the congregation led the prayers and readings, and hopefully our carolling echoed throughout the village. The sermon candy sticks were greatly appreciated. With services scheduled outside and Storm Bella approaching, we wondered on Saturday evening whether indeed the service could take place at Enbourne. Roger and Tim must have spent a few anxious moments as they listened to the rain and wind. However, Storm Bella passed, and Sunday, December 27th dawned a bright and sunny morning. With the altar set up on the south wall, the congregation sat in lovely sunshine, looking down the valley to the Hampshire countryside. Olivia and Patrick read the Epistle and Gospel, whereas Tim preached a thoughtful and reflective sermon using his ancient model engine as a teaching aid. We all agreed it was a fitting conclusion to the Benefice Christmas services. Birding in Kintbury. Although I have had bird feeders in the garden for years and felt confident in my ability to recognise the most common feathered visitors, I had never been a particularly serious bird watcher. I had never seen the attraction in sitting in one of those hides, binoculars in hand, staring for hours across a marsh or woodland in the hope of spotting something you hadn't seen before. However, having been shielding since the spring, and therefore, by necessity, finding myself staring out of the window more intensely, I have found that the birds coming to the collection of feeders in the garden to hold my interest more than I would have thought. So, whilst I do not actually have a hide, I sit here with a cup of tea, a selection of bird identification books, and a notebook and pencil, waiting to see what is going to turn up today. And, I have to admit, I'm finding it a very pleasant and relaxing way to pass the time. I now find it much easier to tell a great tit from a blue tit. The former has a black band down the middle of its waistcoat, whilst a coal tit has a white patch running down the back of its head. I write each down in my little notebook and find myself getting strangely competitive with myself. Sometimes I consider giving myself points for spotting the less familiar. What's that bird that looks like a great tit but a brown breast and a black head? Whoa! A blackcap! 6 points. Then there is what I shall call bird envy. A friend tells me she has seen redwings in her garden, and I am envious because I have only ever seen them once, years ago. But then I spot a willow tit making fleeting visits to my feeders and then hurrying back into the nature reserve, and I experience the satisfaction of having spotted something a bit less familiar, a 10-point bird perhaps. We are lucky living here, in that we are in one of the parts of England in which it is quite common to see a red kite, a bird unknown in these parts 30 years ago. On the other hand, I am noticing that the starlings, not so long ago the most familiar bird in the garden, seem to be getting fewer and fewer, which is sad. Recently, I have seen a heron en route, I presume, from the canal to the nature reserve. It swooped right in front of the window and looked like a low-flying umbrella. Next time I'm walking on Snelsmore Common and I pass one of those hides, conveniently placed at a height for observing whatever is flying into the canopy of leaves, I shall not wonder at how anyone could sit there, binoculars in hand, patiently waiting, but I will think, what a relaxing and fascinating way to pass the time. Tessa Locke. Soon it will be snowdrop time, Candlemas bells reminding us that the light is growing stronger. The superstitious used to believe that these flowers should not be brought into the house prior to Candlemas. However, it is also believed in more recent times that these flowers purify a home. Mary presented Jesus to God at the temple in Jerusalem after observing the traditional 40-day period of purification. According to Luke, Simeon held the baby in his arms and said that he would be a light for the Gentiles. Luke chapter 2, verse 32. It is for this reason that this event is called Candlemas. It occurs at a period between the December solstice and the March equinox, and many people traditionally marked that time of year as winter's halfway point while waiting for the spring. According to some sources, Christians began Candlemas in Jerusalem as early as the 4th century, and the lighting of candles began in the 5th century. And thus the snowdrop, like the bow that spans the cloudy sky, becomes a symbol whence we know that brighter days are nigh. George Wilson. Trying to be cheerful, I turned to Boethius, who, whilst in prison, later executed, wrote the famous Consolation of Philosophy. In it, he wrote, "Nothing is miserable unless you think it so, and on the other hand, nothing brings happiness unless you are content with it." I guess if he could write that in his position, I should be able to cope with Tier 4 and whatever follows. Services in January. 3rd of January, Epiphany. 10:30 a.m, Zoom service only. 10th of January, Baptism of Christ. 17th of January, Epiphany 2. 24th of January, Epiphany 3. 31st of January, the presentation. Due to present circumstances, please check the website, notice boards and weekly email for updates on services.